There are nights when snow falls like whispered promises from a darkened sky, nights when the wind carries secrets older than memory itself. January in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Tennessee was unforgiving in 1878, a season that stripped away pretense and left only truth exposed against the frozen ground. This was such a night. This was the night when two worlds, separated by blood and history, would collide in a way that neither could have imagined. The mountaineer knelt between two graves, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold that bit through his wool coat. Elijah Thornwood was a man carved from the same stone as the mountains around him. 35 years had weathered his face, given him the kind of lines that spoke of hard winters and harder losses. His beard, thick and dark, was dusted with snow. His hands, calloused and strong, rested on the frozen earth above his wife and daughter. Mary Thornwood, born 1844, died 1876. Rose Thornwood, born 1869, died 1876. 2 years had passed since the fever took them. 2 years of breathing when breathing felt like betrayal. 2 years of waking to silence so complete it threatened to swallow him whole. Today would have been Rose's birthday. She would have been 9 years old. Would have been. Those 2 words contained all the cruelty that existence could offer. Eli stood slowly, his joints protesting the cold. He turned his back on the graves, not out of disrespect, but because looking any longer would break something inside him that he needed to keep intact. Just for one more day. Just long enough to decide whether surviving was worth the effort. Inside the cabin, warmth from the stone fireplace barely pushed back the darkness. This place had once held laughter, Mary's humming as she cooked, Rose's delighted squeals as she played with wooden dolls he had carved for her. Now it held only echoes and the oppressive weight of memory. A single photograph sat on the mantel, a family frozen in time, a family that would never age, never change, never exist anywhere except in the fading spaces of his mind. Eli reached for his rifle, not to hunt, not exactly, but because movement was better than stillness, action was better than thought. The Winchester felt familiar in his hands, an old friend that asked nothing and gave him purpose, however small. He loaded it with practiced efficiency, pulled on his heavy coat lined with bearskin, and stepped into the storm. The forest accepted him without judgment. Snow muffled his footsteps as he moved through territory he knew better than most men knew their own homes. These mountains had been his sanctuary since he was a boy. His father had taught him to track, to hunt, to read the land like other men read books. Those skills had kept him alive through war and peace, through joy and devastation. Tonight, they would save 2 lives instead of 1. He followed deer tracks for half an hour, moving with the steady patience of a man who had nowhere else to be. The tracks led him toward Blackwater Creek, frozen solid except where the current ran too fast to capture. That was when he saw it, a splash of crimson against pristine white. Blood, fresh enough that the snow had not yet covered it. Too much blood for a wounded animal. Eli's heartbeat quickened. He knelt, examining the trail. Human, running, stumbling. The tracks were erratic, desperate. Someone was hurt badly. Someone was dying. He should have turned back. Every reasonable instinct told him that getting involved with someone else's trouble was a fool's errand. In these mountains, in these times, minding your own business kept you alive. But Mary's voice echoed in his memory, gentle as spring rain. "You are a good man, Eli. Do not ever lose that. Do not let grief turn you into something you are not." He followed the blood trail. 300 yards downstream, he found her. At first, his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. A woman, collapsed near the creek's edge, half buried in snow. Her clothing was wrong for this climate, wrong for this place. Leather and beadwork, fringed leggings, dark hair spread around her head like spilled ink against white canvas. Apache. Eli froze. An Apache woman, here, in the mountains of Tennessee. It was impossible. The Apache lands were 1,000 miles southwest, yet here she lay, her chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. A gunshot wound had torn through her left shoulder. The blood had slowed to a trickle, which meant she was running out of time. His mind raced through possibilities. Helping her meant trouble. If settlers found out he had sheltered an Apache, they would call him traitor, possibly worse. If her people found her here, they would assume he had caused her harm. There was no scenario where this ended well for him. But leaving her meant certain death. The cold would claim her within the hour. And Eli Thornwood, for all his grief and isolation, was not a man who could walk away from someone dying, not when he had the power to prevent it. He removed his coat, the cold immediately biting into his skin through his wool shirt. He wrapped the heavy bearskin around her shaking body, then lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, frighteningly so, as if the storm had already begun claiming her piece by piece. Her head lolled against his chest. Her breathing was a whisper against the howling wind. The ride back to his cabin felt endless. Each jolt of the horse made her gasp, soft sounds of pain that cut through the storm. Eli spoke to her without knowing why, his voice low and steady. "You are safe now. The storm will not take you tonight. I promise you that." Perhaps he was speaking to her. Perhaps he was speaking to ghosts. Perhaps he was speaking to himself, reminding his own frozen heart that it still knew how to care. Inside the cabin, he worked with desperate focus. He built the fire higher than he ever had, until the heat pushed back every shadow. He cleaned the wound with water he had boiled, his hands steady despite the trembling in his chest. The bullet had passed through clean. That was fortune, at least. He packed it with herbs his mother had taught him about, plants that fought infection and encouraged healing. He wrapped her shoulder with strips of clean linen, then covered her with every blanket he owned. For hours he sat beside the bed, feeding wood to the fire, monitoring her breathing, wiping sweat from her forehead when fever came, then cold cloths when the chills followed. He had not tended to another human being in 2 years, had not touched another person except in passing, meaningless encounters in town. Now his hands remembered gentleness, remembered purpose. Just before dawn, she stirred. Her eyes opened, dark and wide, filled with sudden terror. She tried to sit up, panic flashing across her face when she saw him looming above her. Her hand clawed at the bedding, searching for a weapon that was not there. She found a knife he had foolishly left on the bedside table and seized it, raising the blade between them with shaking arms. Eli stepped back immediately, raising both palms, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. For a brief moment, they stared at each other. Two survivors. Two people who had lost too much and trusted too little. Her eyes searched his face, looking not for kindness but for danger. She had learned the hard way to read men quickly, to distinguish between those who would help and those who would harm. He pointed to the fire, to the steaming cup of water on the table, to the bandages wrapped carefully around her wound. He spoke softly, his voice steady, though adrenaline surged through him. "You are safe here." "I found you in the snow. You were dying. I brought you here. I helped you. I mean you no harm." She did not understand his words, but she understood his restraint. The knife wavered, then lowered slightly, though she did not let it go. Her gaze moved from his face to the room around her. She saw the rifle propped against the wall, unloaded. She saw the photograph on the mantel. She saw the 2 empty chairs by the fire. She saw a man who lived alone, who grieved alone, who had chosen to save her life when he could have walked away. Time passed in heavy silence. The wind pressed against the cabin walls, but inside, something shifted. Hunger overcame fear. Slowly, cautiously, she reached for the food he had set aside. Dried venison, cornbread, water. She ate without taking her eyes off him, every movement guarded, every breath measured. Eli turned away to tend the fire, offering her trust without asking for it in return. When night fell again, she spoke. Her voice was low, hoarse from cold and exhaustion, but there was strength in it. She told him her name, shaping the sounds carefully, as if releasing them carried weight. Nialnish. In her language, it meant one who works hard, one who endures. Through broken words and gestures, she told him what had happened, how soldiers had pursued her while she traveled alone through unfamiliar territory, how she had run until her legs failed and the storm swallowed her path. She pressed a hand to her wounded shoulder, her eyes dark with memory, and he understood enough. Outside, unseen, figures moved in the darkness. Apache scouts had found the trail, her blood in the snow, the marks of a horse leading straight to this cabin. They watched from the tree line, studying the smoke curling from the chimney, the faint movement behind the window. To them, there was no question of coincidence. A white mountaineer sheltering an Apache woman meant only one thing: capture, harm, betrayal. Inside, Nialnish stiffened suddenly, her head turning toward the door. She had heard it too, the distant sound of horses moving through snow, soft but unmistakable. Fear returned to her eyes, not for herself, but for him. She understood the law of her people, the judgment that would come with the sunrise. She knew what warriors would assume when they found her here, wounded, in the home of a white man. By dawn, the Apache would decide whether Elijah Thornwood was her savior or her captor, and that decision would determine whether either of them lived to see another day. The morning broke with hard, pale light that revealed what night had hidden. Eli stepped onto the porch and felt the cold bite into his skin, but he did not retreat. Before him, shapes emerged from the mist like spirits taking form. 6 Apache warriors on horseback, silent and watchful, forming a wide circle around the cabin. Their faces were unreadable. Their rifles and bows were held with calm certainty. Eli knew then that running was useless. Whatever happened next would be decided right here, in this clearing, in this moment. Inside the cabin, Nialnish stood near the doorway, her breath shallow, her body still weak, but her spirit unbroken. When she saw the warriors, relief and fear collided in her chest. They had come for her, but they had also come for him. She understood the stories her people told, the punishments handed down when one of their own was taken by an outsider. If she remained hidden, they would assume the worst, and the man who had saved her would die for an act of mercy. Eli walked forward alone, leaving his rifle behind. He raised his hands, showing them he carried no weapon, no threat. The leader rode closer, his gaze sharp and heavy with judgment. This was Tak, a chief whose name meant running wolf, a man who had survived 56 winters and bore the scars to prove it. Words were exchanged in a language Eli did not understand, but the meaning was clear enough. They were asking where she was. They were asking what he had done to her. Before he could answer, footsteps sounded behind him. Nialnish stepped out into the open. The air seemed to freeze. Murmurs rippled through the circle of warriors as they recognized her. She stood tall despite the pain, her eyes fixed on Tak. Her voice carried across the clearing, urgent and fierce. She spoke of the storm, of the frozen ground where she would have died alone. She told them how this mountaineer had lifted her without hesitation, how he warmed her body, cleaned her wounds, and guarded her while she slept. She spoke of his distance, his respect, his refusal to claim anything from her but her survival. Tak listened without interruption. When she finished, silence stretched long and heavy. Eli waited, every muscle tense, ready for the moment judgment would fall. At last the chief dismounted. He approached the mountaineer, studying him as if weighing his soul. Saving a life, especially the life of an Apache woman, was no small thing. It created a debt that could not be ignored or dismissed. "You pulled her back from death," Tak said at last, his English rough but clear. "That act does not end today. It binds you to us. You are brother now." The warriors did not raise their weapons. Instead, Tak placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, sealing a decision that would bind this man's fate to the tribe in ways he could not yet imagine. One warrior, younger and angrier than the rest, protested loudly. "Hosteen!" His name meant stone wolf. He had lost his own family to white soldiers and could not accept this alliance. But Tok silenced him with a look. Debt is debt. We do not abandon honor, even when it is inconvenient. As the sun climbed higher, Red Skywalker, the eldest among them, stepped forward. He removed a silver bracelet from his own wrist and placed it on Eli's. This marks you as one who walks with us. The sky protects you now. Eli bowed his head in respect, understanding the weight of what had just occurred. He had saved one life in a snowstorm. But in return, his own life had been given new meaning, new purpose, new direction. The Apache did not leave, not yet. They remained at the edge of the clearing, speaking quietly among themselves, watching this white mountaineer with eyes no longer filled with suspicion, but with careful respect. Something had changed. Something ancient and powerful had been set in motion. A debt had been acknowledged. An alliance had been formed. And in the cold morning light of Blue Ridge Mountains, two worlds that should never have met had found common ground in the simple act of one man choosing mercy over fear. The second morning brought clarity that the first had not allowed. Nalnish woke with the sun, her body protesting but her mind sharp. She examined her shoulder wound with practiced efficiency, noting how cleanly the mountaineer had dressed it, how the herbs he had used were already drawing out infection. She changed the bandage herself, her movements deliberate and sure. This was not a woman who waited to be cared for. This was a warrior reclaiming her strength. Eli stirred from his place by the fire where he had spent another sleepless night keeping watch. He found her standing, testing her weight, rolling her shoulder carefully. Their eyes met across the small cabin. Something had shifted between them. The terror of that first night had given way to something more complex. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. They were both survivors. They both understood what it meant to endure. "You heal fast," Eli said, genuine surprise in his voice. "Apache warrior?" Nalnish replied, her English halting but determined. "Strong." The words were simple, but they carried weight. She was not telling him she was recovering. She was telling him who she was, what she was, that the weakness he had seen was temporary, a moment of vulnerability that would not define her. Eli nodded slowly, understanding more than she had spoken. He prepared to go hunting, moving through the familiar routine of checking his rifle, gathering supplies. Nalnish watched him work, then stepped forward and pointed to the Winchester. "Teach?" Eli paused, the request catching him off guard. "Most folks around here would not give an Apache a loaded gun," he said, a hint of dry humor in his gravelly voice. "They would say I had lost my mind." Nalnish met his gaze steadily. "Most folks not Eli." It was the first time she had used his name, the first time she had acknowledged him as something other than a stranger who had saved her life. Something loosened in his chest, a knot he had not realized he was carrying. He showed her how to load the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to control her breathing before the shot. She learned quickly, her hands confident despite her injury. This was not her first time with a firearm. When it was her turn to teach, she led him outside into the forest. The Apache warriors who had remained nearby watched from a distance, curious, but not interfering. Nalnish showed Eli how to read signs he had thought he already understood, how a broken branch told not just that something had passed, but how long ago and in what manner, how the wind carried information if you knew how to listen, how tracks revealed injury, fear, determination. "You are a good teacher," Eli said after an hour of instruction that had humbled him. "Father taught me," Nalnish said, her voice growing quieter. "Before." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Eli understood loss when he heard it, recognized the weight of that single word. Before. Before the world changed. Before everything was taken. Before survival became the only goal that mattered. He did not press her for details. Some stories told themselves when the time was right. Others stayed locked inside forever. They hunted together that afternoon, moving through the forest like dancers who had practiced this routine for years rather than hours. Eli took the shot that brought down a deer. Nalnish had tracked it, guided him into position, anticipated its movement. It was teamwork born of necessity, but executed with unexpected grace. As they worked to dress the animal, Eli felt something he had not experienced in 2 years. Purpose beyond mere survival. The sense that his actions mattered to someone other than himself. They were dragging the deer back toward the cabin when Nalnish froze. Her hand shot up in a gesture that needed no translation. "Stop! Danger!" Eli followed her gaze and saw them. 5 soldiers, perhaps 500 yards to the east, moving through the trees in a search pattern. Their blue uniforms stood out against the white landscape like blood on snow. "Blackwood's men," Nalnish whispered, her body tense as a drawn bow. "Looking for me." Eli's mind raced. If they were discovered here, together, both of them would die. The soldiers would not ask questions. They would not care about the truth. A white man helping an Apache woman was treason in their eyes, punishable by summary execution. They needed to disappear, and they needed to do it now. "We cannot go back to the cabin," Eli said quietly. "They will see our tracks." Nalnish was already moving, thinking 3 steps ahead. Go through creek, water-hide trail. It was brilliant in its simplicity. They abandoned the deer and made for Blackwater Creek, wading through water so cold it burned like fire. The current was strong enough that it would wash away their scent, confuse any dogs the soldiers might have. They moved downstream for half a mile before cutting back toward the cabin from a different angle, approaching from the north where the rocks would hide their footprints. By the time they reached safety, both were shaking from cold and exertion. But they were alive, and more importantly, they had survived through cooperation. Nalnish had not waited for Eli to save her. She had provided the solution. She had led them to safety. The balance between them had shifted again, moving toward something that resembled equality. That night, after they had warmed themselves by the fire and eaten a simple meal, Eli finally asked the question that had been building since he found her. "Why were Blackwood's men hunting you?" Nalnish stared into the flames for a long time before answering. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I was watching Blackwood at Fort Davidson. 3 days' ride from here. I heard him talk to railroad men. He wants Apache land for railroad. Plans attack in 2 weeks. Eli felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "How many people in your tribe?" 200. Women, children, elders, at Blue Ridge Canyon. 3 days' ride west. The numbers settled over them like a shroud. 200 lives, families, children who played and laughed and dreamed of growing old, all marked for death by a man who saw them not as people but as obstacles to profit. Eli had heard stories about Colonel Silas Blackwood. Everyone in these mountains had. A man who twisted duty into justification for atrocity. A man who wore honor like a mask while committing acts that would make devils ashamed. "You need to warn them," Eli said. "But you cannot ride alone. You are still healing." "I go tomorrow," Nalnish replied, her jaw set with determination. "Must." Eli studied her across the firelight. He thought about Mary, about the kind of person she had believed him to be, about Rose, who had seen her father as a hero even when he felt like a failure, about the 2 years he had spent breathing without living, existing without purpose. Then he made a decision that would change everything. "Then I go with you." Nalnish looked at him sharply, searching his face for mockery or pity. She found neither. "Why?" "Not your fight." "Because it is right," Eli said simply. "And because Blackwood is wrong. And because I am tired of standing aside while evil men do evil things." The words hung in the air between them. After a moment, Nalnish extended her hand, not in the way white people shook hands, but palm up, fingers spread. Eli placed his hand against hers, understanding this was more than agreement. It was covenant. It was oath. It was 2 people from different worlds choosing to stand together against darkness. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. And in that small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, an alliance was forged that would reshape more lives than either of them could imagine. Morning brought visitors, not soldiers this time, but the Apache warriors who had granted Eli his life 2 days before. Tak and 5 others rode into the clearing just as Eli and Nalnish were preparing their horses. Haustin was among them, his face still hard with distrust, but present nonetheless. Tak dismounted and approached them. His weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes missed nothing either. "You ride west," he observed. It was not a question. Nalnish stepped forward and spoke rapidly in Apache, her hands moving to emphasize certain points. Eli caught his own name, Blackwood's name, and words he assumed meant danger, attack, warning. The warriors listened intently. Haustin's expression grew darker with each sentence. But it was not anger directed at Eli this time. It was the fury of a man who had seen this story before and knew how it ended. When Nalnish finished, Tak turned to Eli. "You know what you risk? If Blackwood learns a white man helps Apache against him, you are marked for death." "I am already marked," Eli replied. "The moment I brought Nalnish into my home, I chose a side. I will not abandon that choice now." Tak studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We ride with you. 6 warriors. You and Nalnish. Together we go to Blue Ridge Canyon. Warn our people. Prepare for war if necessary." Haustin spoke then, his voice sharp with challenge. "How do we know he will not betray us? Lead us into ambush?" "Because if I wanted you dead," Nalnish said quietly, "I would already be dead. This man had every reason to leave me in the snow, every reason to turn me over to soldiers, every reason to protect himself. Instead, he protected me. That is all the proof you need." The words settled over the group. Even Haustin had no response to that. Trust was not something given easily among the Apache. It was earned through action, demonstrated through sacrifice. Eli had proven himself in the only way that mattered. He had chosen honor over safety, and that choice had earned him something more valuable than gold. It had earned him allies who would stand with him when darkness came. They spent the next hour preparing for the journey. The warriors shared supplies, redistributed weight among the horses, discussed the best route west. Red Sky Walker, the eldest, approached Eli as he was checking his saddle. The old man's face was deeply lined, each wrinkle a story of survival, of wisdom earned through decades of hardship. He reached into a leather pouch and withdrew an eagle feather, its white tip pristine against the dark shaft. He held it out to Eli. "This is from the bird that flies highest, sees farthest," Red Sky Walker said in careful English. "You have shown the courage of eagle, the wisdom to know when to fight and when to heal. Wear this. Let it remind you who you have become." Eli accepted the feather with both hands, bowing his head. The gesture meant more than he could express in words. In his own culture, men shook hands and moved on. But this was different. This was sacred. This was an acknowledgement that transcended language and history and all the blood that had been spilled between their peoples. As they mounted up, Eli noticed Nalnish watching him. There was something new in her expression. Not gratitude exactly. Something deeper. Respect, perhaps. Recognition that they had become something more than rescuer and rescued. They had become partners, equals, 2 people bound by shared purpose and mutual trust. The ride toward Blue Ridge Canyon would take 3 days if weather held and luck favored them. 3 days to cross territory that belonged to neither Apache nor white settlers, land that existed in the spaces between civilization and wilderness. 3 days during which Eli Thornwood, a mountaineer who had lost everything, would discover that sometimes the greatest purpose comes not from what you build for yourself, but from what you sacrifice for others. As they rode west, the sun climbing higher in a sky so blue it hurt to look at, Eli glanced back once at his cabin, at the 2 graves beneath the cottonwood tree, at the life he had known. Mary's voice echoed in his memory one last time. "You are a good man, Eli. Never lose that." He would not lose it. Not now. Not when he finally understood why he had survived when they had not. Some men are saved so they can save others. Some men are left behind so they can stand guard for those who cannot defend themselves. Eli had been given a second chance at purpose, and he would not waste it. The mountains watched them go, silent witnesses to an alliance that should not exist, to a friendship that defied logic and history. 8 riders moving as one toward a confrontation that would test everything they believed about courage, honor, and the possibility of peace in a world determined to choose war. Behind them the snow began to fall again, covering their tracks, erasing evidence of their passage. Ahead, Colonel Silas Blackwood planned his attack, unaware that the woman he hunted was no longer alone, unaware that she had found an ally in the last place anyone would think to look, and unaware that his own darkness would soon be dragged into the light by the very people he had tried to destroy. The journey west tested them in ways that gunfire never could, not through violence but through the slow revelation of character that only shared hardship can provide. They rode through mountain passes where the wind cut like razors, across frozen streams that challenged even the surest-footed horses, through forests so dense that sunlight became a memory rather than a reality. And with each mile, the 8 riders became less a collection of individuals and more a unified force. On the second night, they made camp in a sheltered valley where ancient pines stood like sentinels against the sky. As Eli tended the horses, Hostine approached him. The young warrior's face still carried traces of suspicion, but something else lived there now too. Curiosity, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. "You fight in war?" Hostine asked, gesturing to a scar that ran along Eli's forearm, visible when he rolled up his sleeve. "I did," Eli replied, not looking up from his work. "Different war than yours. Same blood. You kill men." The question hung in the cold air. Eli finished with the horse before answering. "I killed men who were trying to kill me and mine. I took no pleasure in it, found no glory, just did what survival required." Hostine nodded slowly. "This I understand. You know, then, what it means to lose brothers." Eli met his eyes. "I know what it means to lose everyone that mattered." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that needed no further words. They were not so different, the Apache warrior who had lost his family to soldiers and the white mountaineer who had lost his family to fever. Loss was loss. Grief was grief, and the hole it left in a man's chest did not care about the color of his skin or the language he spoke. That night, as they sat around the fire, Red Skywalker told stories. His voice was like wind through canyon walls, carrying tales of how the world began, of trickster spirits and wise animals, of warriors who became stars and stars that became mountains. Eli listened, understanding perhaps half the words but comprehending all of the meaning. Every culture had its stories. Every people had their myths. And in the end, they all said the same thing. Honor matters. Courage matters. How you treat others when no one is watching matters most of all. Nayalnish translated portions for Eli, her English improving with each conversation. She sat close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her even in the frigid air. There was nothing improper in the proximity. It was simply the closeness of 2 people who had learned to trust each other with their lives, who had moved past formality into something more genuine. "Your wife," Naalnish said quietly during a lull in the storytelling. "What was she like?" Eli stared into the flames, surprised by the question but not unwilling to answer. "She was kind, patient with my silences. She saw good in people even when they gave her no reason to. She made our cabin feel like more than wood and stone. She made it feel like home. She was lucky to have you." "No," Eli said, shaking his head. "I was lucky to have her. Every day with her was a gift. I just did not realize it until she was gone." Naalnish was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father used to say that grief is the price we pay for love. The deeper one, the deeper the other. Your father was wise. He was, until Blackwood killed him." The words dropped like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward into silence. The other warriors grew still, their attention shifting to Nyalnish. Even Tak, who rarely showed emotion, leaned forward slightly. 10 winters ago, Nyalnish continued, her voice steady despite the pain beneath it. My father went to Fort Davidson under flag of truce. He wanted to negotiate, to find path where both peoples could live. Blackwood shot him on the steps of the fort, called it self-defense, said my father reached for weapon, but my father carried no weapon. He carried only hope, and Blackwood killed him for it. Eli felt rage kindle in his chest, hot and fierce. The same man who now planned to slaughter 200 more. The same man who saw murder as a tool for profit. Colonel Silas Blackwood was not a soldier. He was a monster wearing a uniform. Then we stop him, Eli said quietly, not just for your people, for all the people he has harmed, for all the people he will harm if someone does not stand against him. Tak spoke then, his voice carrying the weight of authority. We cannot fight army with 8 people. We are warriors, yes, but we are not fools. What we need is proof, evidence that white man's law cannot ignore. That is why we go to Ashford first, Eli said. Before we warn your people. Marshal Jim Dalton is there. He is a good man, honest. If we bring him proof of Blackwood's plans, he will act. And if he does not? Hostine challenged. Then we fight, Eli replied simply, and we die if necessary. But we try the law first. We try peace first. We give justice a chance to work before we turn to war. The group fell silent, considering. It was Nyalnish who broke the quiet. Eli is right. If we attack soldiers, even in defense, we prove what they say about us, that we are savages, that we cannot be trusted. But if we use their law against them, we prove we are people, that we deserve same justice as them. Tak nodded slowly. We go to Ashford. We find this marshal. We give peace its chance, but we prepare for war, just in case. They reached the outskirts of Ashford on the afternoon of the 3rd day. The town was small, perhaps 200 souls, clinging to existence in the shadow of the mountains. A collection of wooden buildings arranged along a single main street. A church steeple rose above the rest, a declaration of faith in a landscape that seemed determined to crush such optimism. Eli rode in first, alone. It would draw less attention than 8 riders arriving together, especially when 6 of them were Apache warriors. He told the others to wait in the tree line, to stay hidden until he could assess the situation. Nyalnish started to protest, wanting to accompany him, but Tak placed a hand on her shoulder. Let him scout, the chief said quietly. He knows his people better than we do. Trust him. The streets of Ashford were quiet in the way of small towns everywhere. A few people moved between buildings, hurrying against the cold. Smoke rose from chimneys. The smell of baking bread drifted from somewhere nearby. It was so ordinary, so peaceful, that it felt like a different world from the one Eli had been inhabiting. A world where the greatest concern was whether the harvest would be good, not whether soldiers would come in the night to murder children. He tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed, and old Sam looked up from behind the counter. The storekeeper was exactly as Eli remembered him, white-haired and bespectacled, his face creased with the kind of wrinkles that came from smiling more than frowning. When he saw Eli, genuine pleasure lit his features. "Elijah Thornwood," Sam said, coming around the counter with surprising speed for a man of 68 years. "I thought you had become a hermit for good. What brings you to town?" "I need your help, Sam, and I need you to trust me." The old man's expression grew serious. He had known Eli since the younger man was a boy, had sold him his first rifle, had attended Mary and Rose's funeral, had never once judged him for his grief. "Whatever you need, son." Eli glanced around the store, confirming they were alone, then spoke quietly but urgently. "What do you know about Colonel Blackwood's activities around here?" Sam's face darkened. "Nothing good. He has been buying up land deeds, forcing people to sell cheap. Railroad is coming through, and he means to profit from it. Anyone who refuses him tends to have accidents. Barns burn, livestock disappear. Last year, the Henderson family refused to sell. Their house caught fire in the night. All 5 of them died. Blackwood called it tragedy. But everyone knows. Do you have proof? Sam moved to a locked drawer beneath the counter, producing a key from his vest pocket. I have something. A copy of a deed he forged, trying to claim land that was not his. The Hendersons' daughter survived, you see. She got out. She gave this to me before she left town, too afraid to stay. Said someone needed to remember the truth. He handed Eli a folded document, yellowed and creased. Eli examined it carefully. The forgery was obvious once you knew to look for it, the signatures slightly off, the dates inconsistent with official records. It was evidence. Not conclusive on its own, but enough to raise questions, enough to start an investigation. I need to borrow this, Eli said. I am taking it to Marshal Dalton. Sam studied him carefully. This is about more than forged deeds, is it not? It is about murder, Eli replied. Planned murder. Blackwood intends to attack an Apache camp. 200 people, Sam, women and children. He plans to kill them all so the railroad can have their land. The old man's face went pale. Dear God, Jim Dalton needs to know, immediately. There is something else you should know, Eli said carefully. I have been sheltering an Apache woman. She was wounded, hunted by Blackwood's men. I saved her life, and now she and her people are helping me stop him. Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and gripped Eli's shoulder. Mary would be proud of you. Doing the right thing when it is hard, that is the measure of a man. You have my support. Whatever you need. The 2 men shook hands, and Eli felt something loosen in his chest. He was not alone in this. There were still good people in the world. People who would stand for justice even when it was dangerous, even when it cost them something. He left the store and made his way to the marshal's office at the far end of town. Jim Dalton was there, as Eli had hoped, sitting behind a battered desk reviewing reports. The marshal was 52, his hair more silver than brown now, but his eyes were still sharp. He had been a lawman for 30 years, through war and peace, through times when the law meant something and times when it was just words on paper. He looked up when Eli entered, surprise evident on his weathered face. Eli Thornwood. Did not expect to see you in town. What brings you here? Justice, Eli said simply, or the chance at it anyway. He told Dalton everything, about finding Nyalnish, about learning of Blackwood's plans, about the forged deed and the murdered family, and the attack being planned on innocent people. He laid it all out like cards on a table, holding nothing back. When he finished, Dalton sat in silence, his expression unreadable. These are serious accusations, the marshal finally said. Accusing a military officer of conspiracy to commit mass murder, that is not something done lightly. I am not doing it lightly, Eli replied. I am doing it because it is true, and because if someone does not stop him, 200 people will die. Where is this Apache woman now? Outside town, with 6 warriors. They came to help warn their people, to help stop Blackwood. Dalton stood, moving to the window, staring out at the quiet street. You are asking me to arrest a colonel based on the testimony of an Apache woman and a forged deed. You understand how that will look. I understand how it will look if you do nothing and those people die. History will judge you, Marshal. Make sure it judges you fairly. The lawman was quiet for another long moment. Then he turned back to Eli. Bring her in. The woman. I want to hear her story directly, and I want to see these warriors you speak of. If I am going to stake my career and possibly my life on this, I need to look them in the eyes. Eli nodded and left to retrieve the others. When he returned 20 minutes later with Nyalnish and the 6 Apache warriors, half the town had gathered to watch. People peered from windows and doorways, curiosity and fear mingling in equal measure. It was not every day that Apache rode openly down the main street of a Tennessee town. In Dalton's office, Nyalnish told her story. Her English was broken, her accent thick, but her meaning was crystal clear. She described what she had overheard at Fort Davidson, the meetings with railroad executives, the plans for the attack, the casual way Blackwood had discussed exterminating her people as if they were nothing more than inconvenient animals. Dalton listened, his face growing grimmer with each detail. When she finished, he asked her to repeat certain parts, testing for consistency, looking for any sign of deception. He found none. This was a woman telling the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. "I need more than testimony," Dalton finally said. "I need someone from inside Blackwood's operation. Someone who can verify these plans from first-hand knowledge." As if summoned by the words themselves, the door to the office opened. A young officer in a lieutenant's uniform stepped inside, his face pale but determined. Marcus Webb had the look of a man who had not slept in days, whose conscience had finally overwhelmed his fear. "I can verify it," Webb said, his voice shaking slightly. "All of it. Every word she said is true. I was there. I heard the plans. And I am ready to testify." The air in Marshal Dalton's office changed the moment Lieutenant Marcus Webb stepped through the door. It was as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Eli's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle. Nalnish tensed, her fingers curling into fists. The Apache warriors shifted their weight, ready to fight or flee depending on what happened in the next 30 seconds. But Webb raised his hands slowly, palms out, showing he carried no weapon. His uniform was rumpled, his face haggard. This was not a man coming to make arrests. This was a man coming to confess. "Wait," Webb said, his voice cracking slightly. "Please, I am not here to fight. I am here because I cannot live with what I have done, with what I have allowed to happen." Marshal Dalton stood behind his desk, one hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Speak plain, Lieutenant. What are you doing here?" Webb looked at Nalnish, and something like shame crossed his features. "I know you. I was there the night they shot you. I was the one who tracked you through the snow. I reported your escape to Colonel Blackwood, and I have been sick with it ever since." Nalnish's eyes blazed with fury, but she remained silent, letting the man speak. Eli moved closer to her, not protectively, but in solidarity. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "I have followed Blackwood's orders for 3 years," Webb continued, his words tumbling out faster now. "I thought I was serving my country, thought I was doing my duty. But burning homes, hunting wounded women through snowstorms, planning to massacre 200 people, including children, that is not duty, that is murder, and I will not be part of it anymore." He reached into his coat, moving slowly so no one would mistake the gesture for aggression, and withdrew a leather folder. Inside were documents, letters, maps. He spread them across Dalton's desk like evidence at a trial. "This is Blackwood's correspondence with the railroad company, promises of payment once the Apache land is cleared. This is the attack plan, his handwriting, detailing how many men, what route, when to strike. And this," Webb said, pulling out a final paper, "this is a letter from the War Department explicitly forbidding any military action against the Apache in this region without direct authorization from Washington. Authorization Blackwood never requested because he knew it would be denied." Dalton picked up each document, examining them with the careful attention of a man who understood their importance. His face remained neutral, but Eli could see the anger building behind his eyes. This was not just evidence of one man's crime. This was evidence of corruption, of the misuse of military power, of conspiracy to commit atrocities for profit. "Why now?" Dalton asked Webb. "Why come forward now?" "Because I saw her," Webb replied, nodding toward Nalnish. "I saw her bleeding in the snow, running for her life. And I thought about my own sister. I thought about what I would want someone to do if she were hunted like an animal. And I realized I had become the kind of man I used to despise, the kind who follows orders without questioning them, who lets evil happen because stopping it would be inconvenient." He turned to face Naalnish directly. "I cannot undo what I have done, cannot bring back your father, cannot erase my part in hunting you, but I can stop what comes next. I can testify. I can make sure Blackwood faces justice instead of committing more murders in the name of progress." Nalnish studied him for a long moment. Everyone in the room waited, the tension thick enough to cut. Finally she spoke, her words careful and deliberate. "You cannot bring back my father. True, but you can honor his memory by telling truth, by standing for what is right even when it is hard. If you do this, if you testify, I will not call you enemy. I will call you man who found his courage." Webb's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thank you. I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I will earn your respect if it takes the rest of my life." Dalton cleared his throat, breaking the emotional moment. "This is enough. With Webb's testimony and these documents, I am issuing a warrant for Colonel Silas Blackwood's arrest. Charges of conspiracy to murder, fraud, misuse of military authority, and violation of federal treaty obligations." He began writing, his pen scratching across official paper with swift efficiency. When he finished, he looked up at the assembled group. "But understand this, when Blackwood learns about this warrant, he will not come quietly. He has 30 men at Fort Davidson. He has influence, and he has shown himself willing to kill to protect his interests. We need to be ready for retaliation." Eli spoke up. "How long before he knows?" "Word travels fast," Dalton replied. "I would say we have maybe a few hours, maybe less if someone rides hard to warn him." As if summoned by prophecy, the door to the office burst open. A young man, barely out of his teens, stumbled inside, breathless from running. His eyes were wide with fear. "Marshal," he gasped, "Blackwood is coming. Someone from town rode out an hour ago to warn him about the Apache being here. He is bringing at least 20 men. They will be here within the hour." The room erupted into motion. Tack began issuing orders in Apache to his warriors. Eli checked his rifle. Nalnish moved to the window, assessing sightlines and cover, but it was Dalton who brought order back with a single command. "Everyone stop. We are not turning this town into a battlefield. Too many innocent people could be caught in the crossfire. We need a different strategy." "What do you suggest?" Eli asked. "We make a stand," Dalton said, "but we do it smart. We gather every able man in town who is willing to fight for what is right. We position them where they can provide cover without exposing civilians. And we give Blackwood one chance to surrender peacefully. If he refuses, then we show him that justice has teeth." Eli nodded. "I will help spread the word. Who in this town can be trusted to stand against a military officer?" "More than you might think," came a voice from the doorway. Reverend Thomas Hayes stood there, his collar marking him as a man of God, but his expression showing he was also a man willing to fight for the righteous cause. "I have already begun gathering people in the church. Word of what you are doing has spread, and there are men here, good men, who are tired of watching Blackwood terrorize this region. They will stand with you." Within 30 minutes, the transformation of Ashford was complete. What had been a quiet town became an armed camp. 15 men positioned themselves strategically along the main street, behind water troughs, on rooftops, in second-story windows. They carried hunting rifles, old military muskets, even a few shotguns. They were not professional soldiers. They were farmers, shopkeepers, blacksmiths. But they were men who understood that sometimes the cost of peace is the willingness to fight for it. The Apache warriors took positions on the outskirts, hidden in the tree line, providing a perimeter that would prevent Blackwood from flanking the town. Nalnish insisted on being in the center of town, standing in the open where Blackwood could see her, where he would have to face the woman he had tried to kill. Eli stood beside her, his rifle held loosely but ready. "You do not have to be the bait," he said quietly. "Yes, I do," she replied. "This is not just about stopping him. It is about showing him that we are not afraid, that he failed, that for all his power and all his men, he could not silence one Apache woman." The sound of horses reached them before the riders came into view. 20 men on horseback, riding in formation, led by a tall figure whose very posture radiated arrogance. Colonel Silas Blackwood sat his horse like a man who had never doubted his own authority, never questioned his right to decide who lived and who died. When he saw the armed townspeople, the Apache warriors visible at the edges, and Nalnish standing defiantly in the center of the street, he pulled his horse to a halt. His face, scarred and weathered, twisted into an expression of contempt. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Some kind of rebellion? You dare point weapons at United States military?" Marshal Dalton stepped forward, his badge catching the afternoon sun. "Colonel Silas Blackwood, you are under arrest. Charges include conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and violation of federal law. Dismount from your horse and surrender your weapon." Blackwood laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Arrest? On whose authority?" "United States Marshal Service." "Step down, Colonel. Do not make this worse than it already is." The colonel's eyes swept across the assembled crowd, noting the determination in their faces, the steadiness of their weapons. Then his gaze locked onto Nalnish, and something like recognition flickered there. "You, the Indian woman. I shot you myself. How are you still alive?" Nalnish stepped forward, her voice ringing clear and strong. "You shot me." "True, just like you shot my father 10 years ago. Mongoose came in peace, and you killed him, called him savage. But who is savage here? Man who seeks peace, or man who murders for profit?" A murmur ran through Blackwood's soldiers. Several of them shifted uncomfortably. This was not the story they had been told. They had been told the Apache were aggressors, dangerous, less than human. But here stood a woman speaking truth with more dignity than their commander had ever shown. Blackwood's face darkened. "You know nothing of what happened. Your father was a threat, just like you are a threat, just like all your kind are threats to progress, to civilization." Lieutenant Webb stepped forward then, his voice shaking but determined. "She knows everything, Colonel. Because I told her. I told Marshal Dalton. I gave him the documents proving you planned to massacre 200 Apache for railroad money. I gave him your correspondence, your attack plans, everything." Blackwood turned on Webb with such fury that his horse danced sideways. "You traitorous coward! I should have known you lacked the stomach for what needed to be done." "What needed to be done?" Webb shot back, his fear transforming into righteous anger. "Murdering children? Burning villages? That is not military duty. That is genocide, and I will not let you hide behind a uniform while committing it." More murmurs from Blackwood's men. Eli could see doubt spreading through their ranks like cracks in ice. These were not all bad men. Some had joined the military for honor, for purpose. They had followed orders because they believed those orders served a greater good. Now they were learning that their leader had perverted everything they stood for. Reverend Hayes stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of moral conviction. "Colonel, you have a choice. You can surrender peacefully, face trial, and let justice take its course. Or you can fight here, in the street, and force these good people to defend themselves against you. But know this, if you choose violence, history will remember you not as a soldier, but as a murderer, and God will judge you accordingly." The standoff stretched. Eli could feel every heartbeat, could hear the wind moving through the bare branches of the trees. Beside him, Nalnish stood perfectly still, her courage a tangible force. Then one of Blackwood's soldiers lowered his rifle. "I did not sign up for this," the man said. "Did not sign up to kill women and children. I am out." Another soldier followed suit. Then another. Within moments, 15 of the 20 men had dismounted, disarmed, and stepped away from their commander. Only 5 remained, the true believers, the ones whose loyalty to Blackwood outweighed their conscience. Blackwood's face went from red to white. "Cowards," he hissed. "All of you. You will hang for this. You will all hang." "No," Dalton said quietly. "You will hang, or spend the rest of your life in prison, but your reign of terror ends today." The colonel reached for his sidearm in a motion born of desperation rather than strategy. But Eli was faster. His rifle cracked once, sharp and clear in the cold air. The bullet struck Blackwood's hand, sending his pistol spinning away. The colonel cried out, clutching his bleeding hand, and tumbled from his horse. Dalton's deputies rushed forward, surrounding Blackwood, binding his hands despite his curses and threats. The 5 soldiers who had remained loyal dropped their weapons, realizing the futility of resistance. It was over. Done. Justice had been served not through overwhelming force, but through courage, truth, and the willingness of good people to stand together against evil. As Blackwood was dragged toward the marshal's office, he locked eyes with Eli one final time. "You have made a powerful enemy today, Mountaineer. This is not over." "Yes," Eli replied calmly. "It is. You just have not accepted it yet." The townspeople began to emerge from their defensive positions, relief and exhilaration mixing in equal measure. Old Sam approached Eli, gripping his shoulder. "You did it. You actually did it. Stood up to a colonel and won." "We did it," Eli corrected. "All of us. That is the only way it could have worked." As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Nyalnish approached Eli. They stood together, watching as order was restored, as the crisis passed into memory. She did not speak, but she did not need to. Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining briefly, a moment of connection that acknowledged everything they had been through, everything they had become to each other. In that moment, Elijah Thornwood understood that he had not just saved one woman's life in a snowstorm. He had found his own reason to live, had discovered that purpose comes not from what you build for yourself, but from what you sacrifice for others. And sometimes, just sometimes, standing for what is right is enough to change the world. Night fell over Ashford like a benediction. The town that had stood on the edge of violence now settled into an uneasy peace, the kind that comes after storms when everyone is too exhausted to do anything but breathe. In the marshal's office, Colonel Silas Blackwood sat in a cell, his wounded hand bandaged, his face a mask of impotent rage. Outside, guards rotated in shifts, ensuring he would not escape to exact revenge on those who had brought him low. But victory, Eli was learning, carried its own weight. In the saloon that old Sam had opened for the occasion, the men who had stood together gathered to process what they had done. Not to celebrate exactly. These were not men who took pleasure in violence, even righteous violence. They gathered because they needed to be among others who understood what it meant to draw a line and refuse to let evil cross it. Eli sat at a corner table with Nalnish, Tak, and Hosteen. The Apache warriors had been offered rooms at the boarding house, an unprecedented gesture in a town where most had never spoken to a native person without suspicion or fear. The woman who ran the establishment, a widow named Catherine Morrison, had simply said that anyone who stood against tyranny deserved a warm bed and a hot meal. Sometimes progress happened not through grand declarations, but through small acts of human decency. Marshal Dalton entered the saloon looking 20 years older than he had that morning. He carried the weight of command, the knowledge that his decisions had nearly turned the street into a killing ground. He approached their table and sat without invitation, accepting the whiskey that Sam poured for him. "Blackwood will be transported to Nashville in 3 days," Dalton said. "Federal marshals are coming to escort him. He will face trial for everything. The murder of Nalnish's father, the planned massacre, the fraud, all of it. Lieutenant Webb has agreed to testify, as have 5 of the soldiers who turned against him. The case is solid." "And the railroad?" Eli asked. "They will just find another man to do their dirty work." "Maybe," Dalton admitted. "But they will find it harder now. This is going to be a very public trial. Newspapers as far as Washington will cover it. The idea that corporations can hire military officers to commit genocide for profit, that is going to become a scandal. At least for a while there will be scrutiny, and scrutiny is the enemy of corruption." Tak listened to this exchange, his weathered face thoughtful. "In my lifetime," he said slowly, speaking English for the benefit of all present, "I have seen many promises from white government, many treaties signed and broken, many words that meant nothing when it was inconvenient to keep them. But today, I saw something different. I saw people, not government, choose to do right thing. That is worth remembering." Hosteen, who had started this journey barely able to look at Eli without hatred, now raised his glass toward the mountaineer. I judged you wrong. Judged all of you wrong. I thought you were all the same as the men who killed my family. But you are not. Some of you have honor. And that is worth fighting alongside." The sentiment was echoed around the table, a moment of understanding that transcended the barriers of language and history. They were not naive. One victory did not erase centuries of bloodshed and betrayal. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had divided their peoples. And through that crack, light was finding its way. Nalnish had been quiet throughout the evening, her mind clearly elsewhere. Now she turned to Eli, her dark eyes searching his face. "What will you do now? Go back to your cabin? Back to being alone?" Eli considered the question. A week ago, he would have said yes, without hesitation. The cabin was all he had known since losing Mary and Rose, his refuge from a world that had taken too much. But something had changed in him during this journey. He had remembered what it felt like to have purpose beyond mere survival, to be part of something larger than his own grief. "I do not know," he admitted. "The cabin will always be there, but I am not sure I want to be the man who hides from the world anymore, not when there is still so much that needs doing." "You could come west with us," Nalnish said, "to Blue Ridge Canyon. My people would welcome you. You have earned that right." The offer hung in the air, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. To leave everything he had known, to live among people whose ways were foreign to him, whose language he barely understood. It would be easier to return to solitude, to the familiar patterns of grief and routine. But easy had never been the same as right. Before Eli could respond, the saloon door burst open. A rider stood there, covered in trail dust, his face urgent with news. He spotted Marshal Dalton and rushed over. "Sir, you need to know. There is talk at Fort Davidson. Some of Blackwood's men, the ones who stayed loyal, they are planning to break him out during the transport to Nashville. They are gathering support, maybe 15 or 20 men." Dalton's expression hardened. "When?" "Tomorrow night. They plan to ambush the transport wagon in Cooper's Pass. It is narrow there, easy to set up a crossfire." The table fell silent as the implications settled over them. Cooper's Pass was 40 miles north, a mountain road where the wagon would be vulnerable. If Blackwood's men succeeded in freeing him, everything they had accomplished would be undone. He would disappear into the wilderness, rally more supporters, and the cycle of violence would continue. "We cannot let that happen," Eli said. "We stop them at the pass, set up our own ambush, turn their plan against them." "You are talking about fighting soldiers again," Dalton warned. "Federal authorities will not look kindly on civilians attacking military personnel, even corrupt ones." "Then we do not attack," Tak interjected. "We defend. We protect the transport. That is not the same thing." Nalnish leaned forward, her strategic mind already working through possibilities. "Cooper's Pass has high ground on both sides. If we position people there first, we control the terrain. And if Blackwood's men see they are outnumbered and outmaneuvered, maybe they surrender without fight. Or maybe they attack anyway," Hosteen added grimly. "And we have to kill them." "You all ready for that?" The question hung heavy. These were not professional warriors planning an ambush. They were ordinary people who had already risked their lives once and were being asked to do so again. It would be understandable if they chose safety over continued struggle. No one would blame them for letting federal authorities handle it, even if those authorities were days away. But Eli looked around the table and saw the same determination he felt. They had come too far to let Blackwood escape justice through the cowardice of his remaining followers. Sometimes the price of peace was the willingness to fight one more battle. "I will go," Eli said simply. "Who stands with me?" Every hand at the table went up, then old Sam's hand, then Reverend Hayes, who had been listening from across the room, then Catherine Morrison, the boarding house owner, who announced she might be a woman of 60, but she could still shoot straight. Within minutes, 20 people had volunteered, a mix of townspeople and Apache warriors, bound together by shared purpose. They spent that night preparing. Eli and Tak rode ahead to Cooper's Pass to scout the terrain, identifying the best positions for their people. The pass was exactly as described, a narrow gap between two rocky ridges where a wagon would be forced to slow to a crawl. Perfect for an ambush, which meant perfect for a counter-ambush. "We put riflemen on both ridges," Eli explained, drawing in the dirt with a stick. "High enough that they have clear sight lines but protected by rocks. The wagon comes through, and if Blackwood's men attack, they find themselves caught between our positions." "And if they are smart enough to check the ridges first?" Tak asked. "Then we show ourselves. Make it clear they are outnumbered. Give them the chance to surrender before shots are fired. Minimize bloodshed if possible." "You have become wise," the Apache chief observed. "When I first saw you, I thought you were just angry man with rifle. But you think like leader, like someone who understands that victory without honor is just another kind of defeat." "I had a good teacher," Eli replied, thinking of Mary. "She used to say that how you win matters as much as whether you win." "I am trying to remember that." By dawn, they were in position. 15 people on the north ridge, including Eli and Nyalnish. 8 on the south, led by Tak and Hosteen. Marshal Dalton drove the transport wagon himself, with Lieutenant Webb riding shotgun. Inside the wagon, Colonel Blackwood sat shackled and seething, unaware that his rescue was about to become his final downfall. The ambush came exactly when the informant had predicted. As the wagon entered the narrowest part of the pass, 20 riders emerged from cover ahead and behind, surrounding it. They wore civilian clothes now rather than uniforms, trying to obscure their military identity. Their leader, a sergeant named Crenshaw, called out to Dalton. "Hand over the colonel," Crenshaw demanded. "Do it peaceful, and nobody gets hurt." Dalton's response was to pull back the canvas covering the wagon, revealing Blackwood in chains. "This man is a prisoner of federal law. He is going to trial. If you interfere, you become criminals yourselves." "We are soldiers following our commander," Crenshaw shot back. "Our loyalty means something, even if yours does not." That was when Eli stood up on the north ridge, his rifle clearly visible. "On your left and right," he called down. 20 guns pointed at you. You are surrounded. You have one chance to ride away. Take it." Crenshaw's men looked up, seeing the fighters positioned on both ridges. Their confidence wavered. This was not the easy rescue they had planned. This was a trap, and they had walked straight into it. "You are bluffing," Crenshaw said, but his voice lacked conviction. Nyalnish stood then, joining Eli. Her voice carried across the pass, strong and clear. "I am the woman your colonel tried to kill, the one he called savage, the one whose father he murdered. I am standing here free while he sits in chains. That is not bluffing, that is justice. And you can be part of it or against it. Choose now." The riders shifted nervously. Several began edging their horses backward. They had signed up to rescue their commander, not to die in a hopeless fight against people who had already proven they would stand their ground. "Stand down," came an unexpected voice. It was one of Crenshaw's own men, a corporal who had clearly been thinking hard about what side of history he wanted to be on. "This is wrong. We all know it. Blackwood lied to us, used us. I am not dying for a liar." The corporal dismounted and laid down his rifle. 3 others followed his example. Then 5 more. The resolve of Crenshaw's force crumbled like sand. Within minutes, only Crenshaw and 4 others remained on horseback, surrounded by their own former comrades who had chosen a different path. "Last chance," Marshal Dalton called. "Surrender or face the consequences." Crenshaw looked at the ridges, at his depleted force, at the face of Colonel Blackwood visible in the wagon. Whatever he saw there, it killed his last bit of fight. He dismounted slowly, unbuckled his gun belt, and let it drop to the ground. The 4 remaining men did the same. "Smart choice," Dalton said. "You will be detained until we sort out your level of involvement. But you will live, and you will have the chance to make better choices in the future." As the prisoners were secured and the transport continued toward Nashville, Eli sat on a rock watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Nyalnish joined him, and they sat in companionable silence for a long moment. "It is over," she finally said. "Really over. This part is," Eli agreed. But something is beginning too. Something neither of us expected. She looked at him, a question in her eyes. I have been thinking about your offer, he continued. About coming west with you. About being part of something instead of apart from everything. And I think if the invitation still stands, I would like to accept it. Nalnish smiled, a rare full smile that transformed her face. The invitation stands. Always. You are already family, Eli Thornwood. Now you just need to come home. Below them, the wagon disappeared around a bend, carrying Silas Blackwood toward justice. Behind them, the people of Ashford and the Apache warriors began the journey back to town, their alliance forged in fire and proven in action. And ahead, somewhere in the vast expanse of mountain and sky, a new future waited. One built not on hatred and fear, but on the simple truth that courage, honor, and the willingness to stand for what is right can bridge any divide. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist, and in its light, two people who had saved each other's lives sat together, no longer strangers from different worlds, but companions walking the same path toward whatever came next. 3 months passed like water flowing over stones, reshaping everything it touched. Spring came to the Blue Ridge Mountains with a gentleness that seemed impossible after the harshness of winter. Snow melted into rushing streams. Wildflowers pushed through soil that had been frozen solid. Trees that had stood bare and skeletal now wore crowns of green so bright it hurt to look at them. The world was being reborn, and with it, the people who had fought so hard to protect it. News of Colonel Blackwood's trial reached them through traveling merchants and newspaper accounts that made their way into the mountains. The trial had been everything Marshal Dalton predicted. Public, scandalous, covered by journalists from cities as far away as Boston and Atlanta. Lieutenant Marcus Webb had testified for 3 days, laying out in meticulous detail every crime, every conspiracy, every life that Blackwood had destroyed in his pursuit of wealth. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Lieutenant Webb, whose testimony had proven decisive, received immunity from prosecution for his role in Blackwood's schemes. The court recognized that his courage in coming forward had prevented a massacre and exposed corruption at the highest levels. He resigned his commission with honor and returned to his sister's farm in Pennsylvania, determined to spend the rest of his life making amends through action rather than words. But the true impact of the trial went beyond one man's punishment. It had forced a reckoning. The War Department launched investigations into other officers suspected of similar corruption. Railroad companies found their land acquisition methods under unprecedented scrutiny, and in the halls of government there was talk, however tentative, of reforms that might actually protect native peoples rather than exploit them. It was not nearly enough, not even close to justice for centuries of broken promises and stolen land, but it was something. A small crack in a massive wall, and through that crack, change might eventually find its way. Eli Thornwood stood on the porch of his cabin, though it barely resembled the isolated structure it had been 4 months earlier. The Apache warriors had helped him expand it, adding 2 rooms and a covered area where people could gather in any weather. The cabin sat at a crossroads now, literally and figuratively. The path leading west connected to Apache territories at Blue Ridge Canyon. The path leading east wound back toward Ashford and the world of white settlements. And increasingly, people traveled both paths, meeting at this place that had become something unexpected. A bridge, a neutral ground, a space where 2 cultures could interact without fear or suspicion. Nalnish emerged from inside carrying firewood, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely healed. The bullet wound that had nearly killed her was now just another scar, another story written on her body. She had remained at the cabin through the winter and into spring, teaching Eli the Apache language and learning more English herself. Their partnership had deepened through countless shared tasks, through long conversations by firelight, through the comfortable silences that only existed between people who had seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. "The garden is coming in well," she observed, nodding toward the plot where they had planted vegetables using techniques from both their cultures. Eli's knowledge of mountain soil combined with her understanding of companion planting had created something more productive than either could have managed alone. "Mary would have loved this," Eli said quietly. "She always wanted a bigger garden, always talked about having enough to share with neighbors. I think she would be proud of what we are building here." Nalnish set down the firewood and stood beside him. "You talk about her more now. That is good. Keeping their memory alive, that is how we honor them. I am learning that grief does not mean forgetting. It means carrying them forward, making choices they would have approved of, becoming someone they would have been proud to know." The sound of horses drew their attention. A group was approaching from the west. 6 riders, Apache, including Tak and Hosteen. They came monthly now, bringing news from the canyon, trading goods, maintaining the connection that had been forged in crisis and strengthened through consistent effort. With them rode Red Sky Walker, the elder who had given Eli the eagle feather that still hung in a place of honor inside the cabin. As the riders drew closer, Eli noticed something different. They were not alone. Behind the warriors came families, women and children, elders and young couples. Perhaps 20 people in total, traveling with the kind of belongings that suggested not a visit but a relocation. Tak dismounted and clasped Eli's forearm in the greeting that had become standard between them. "We bring news, both good and complicated. The government has offered our people a reservation, protected land where we can live without fear of displacement." "That is good, is it not?" Eli asked, though he heard the hesitation in the chief's voice. "It is far from here, in Arizona territory, and while it promises safety, it also means leaving land where our ancestors are buried, leaving the mountains that have been home for generations. So some of our people are choosing to go, and some are choosing to stay, to find a different way to live that does not require abandoning everything we know." He gestured to the families behind him. "These are the ones who choose to stay. They ask if they can settle near here, build homes, continue the trading relationship we have started, live in peace beside your people instead of apart from them." Eli looked at Nalnish, then back at Tak. "This land does not belong to me. It belongs to whoever has the courage to make a life here. They are welcome, more than welcome. We will help them build, help them establish themselves, and anyone from Ashford who has a problem with it will answer to me." Hosteen, who had been unloading supplies, smiled broadly. "Listen to him. Talks like chief now. When I first met you, you could barely look at me without fear. Now you threaten to fight anyone who disrespects us. You have changed, Eli Thornwood." "We all have," Eli replied. "That is the point. That is what this is all about. Proving that people can change, that enemies can become friends, that the future does not have to repeat the mistakes of the past." Over the following weeks, a small community took shape. The Apache families built homes using a combination of their traditional methods and techniques Eli taught them for weathering mountain winters. In return, they shared their knowledge of tracking, of herbal medicine, of living in harmony with the land rather than conquering it. Children played together, inventing games that blended both cultures. Elders told stories that the young ones, both Apache and white, listened to with equal fascination. People from Ashford began visiting too. At first, tentatively, driven by curiosity or the pragmatic desire to trade for the beautiful crafts the Apache women created. But gradually, the visits became about more than commerce. Reverend Hayes came to discuss philosophy with Red Sky Walker, finding common ground between Christian theology and Apache spirituality. Old Sam brought books to trade for medicinal herbs, staying for meals and conversation. Catherine Morrison taught Apache women how to bake bread in the style of her ancestors, while learning how to make pemmican that would last through any hardship. Not everyone accepted the changes with open arms. There were those in Ashford and the surrounding settlements who viewed the Apache presence with suspicion and hostility. Ugly words were spoken, threats were made, but they found no purchase. The people who had stood against Blackwood stood again against prejudice. They made it clear that this new arrangement had powerful defenders, and slowly, grudgingly, opposition faded into reluctant tolerance, which was not acceptance, not yet, but it was a start. On a warm afternoon in May, Eli made a journey he had been postponing. He walked to the 2 graves beneath the cottonwood tree, carrying wildflowers he had picked along the way. Nayalnish had offered to accompany him, but he had asked for this time alone. Some conversations needed to happen in solitude. He knelt between the graves, placing flowers on each mound of earth. The markers he had carved 3 years ago were weathering now, the names growing faint. He would need to replace them soon. The thought no longer filled him with despair. It was just another task, another way of honoring memory. Mary. Rose, he said quietly. I know it has been a long time since I have been here. Not because I have forgotten you. Never that. But because I have finally started living again, instead of just surviving. I hope, that would make you happy. He told them about Nalnish, about the Apache families, about the community growing at the crossroads. He told them about standing against Blackwood, about finding purpose in protecting others. He told them about learning a new language, about discovering that courage came in many forms, about understanding that loss did not have to be the end of everything. I am not replacing you, he said, his voice breaking slightly. You will always be my first family, my first love. But I am learning that the heart is bigger than we think, that it can hold grief and joy at the same time, that honoring you means living the kind of life you would have wanted for me, a life of purpose and connection and hope. The wind moved through the cottonwood branches, creating a sound like distant conversation. Eli chose to interpret it as blessing, as permission to move forward without guilt, as his wife and daughter telling him what he already knew in his heart. That love does not end with death. It transforms. It becomes part of how we live, how we treat others, how we choose to walk through the world. When he returned to the cabin, he found it full of life. Apache children were learning English words from Catherine Morrison. Hostine and Old Sam were engaged in an animated debate about the best way to tan leather. Nalnish was teaching several women from town how to identify edible plants in the forest. The smell of cooking food filled the air, a blend of cuisines that created something entirely new. Tak appeared at Eli's side, handing him a cup of something warm and fragrant. You look lighter, the chief observed. Like burden you have carried for long time is finally gone. Not gone, Eli corrected, but shared, distributed among people who care enough to help carry it. That makes all the difference. You have given my people something precious, Tak said. Not just land to live on, though that matters. But you have given us hope that coexistence is possible, that we do not have to choose between losing everything we are and fighting until we are destroyed. You have shown a third path. We have shown it together, Eli replied. I could not have done any of this alone. None of us could. That is the lesson, I think. That the problems that seem impossible for one person or one group become manageable when we work together. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in colors that seemed too beautiful to be real, the community gathered outside. Someone had brought a fiddle. Someone else had Apache drums. The music that emerged was neither fully one tradition nor the other, but something new and alive. People danced, laughed, told stories. Children who would grow up knowing both cultures as their birthright ran between the adults. Their joy, a promise of a different future. Nayalnish found Eli at the edge of the gathering, watching with quiet satisfaction. You are smiling, she observed. I have seen you content. I have seen you determined, but I do not think I have seen you truly smile until now. I was just thinking, Eli said, about how all of this started, about finding you in that snowstorm, about making a choice that could have gotten me killed, and about how that one choice led to all of this, to a community, to healing, to hope. It makes me wonder how many other moments like that exist. How many chances we have every day to choose connection over isolation, courage over fear, love over hate. Many chances, Nalnish replied. But most people do not take them. You did. That is why this exists. Because you saw a person dying and chose to act instead of walk away. Everything else followed from that. She moved closer, and for the first time, Eli felt something shift between them. Something that had been building through months of partnership and trust. Not the desperate attraction of lonely people seeking comfort, but something deeper. The recognition of two souls who had found in each other not completion, but companionship. Not salvation, but the courage to keep building despite the pain of the past. "What now?" she asked quietly. "What do we build next?" Eli looked at the gathering, at the impossible community that had grown from one act of mercy. "We keep building. Keep proving it can work. Keep being the example that others need to see. And maybe, if we are lucky, this becomes something that lasts beyond us. A legacy not of conquest or grief, but of what happens when people choose to see each other's humanity." The music swelled. The stars emerged one by one, ancient witnesses to the small drama unfolding below. And in that moment, Elijah Thornwood understood that he had not just survived his losses, he had transcended them, had taken the worst thing that ever happened to him and transformed it into fuel for something good. Something that would outlive him. Something that would matter. Years from now, when he was old and his bones ached with the weight of time, he would tell this story to children who gathered at his feet. He would tell them about the snowstorm and the wounded woman and the choice that changed everything. He would tell them that evil is real, that injustice is powerful, that darkness sometimes seems overwhelming. But he would also tell them that ordinary people, making brave choices in crucial moments, can push back that darkness, can create spaces where light grows, can build bridges across divides that seem impossible to cross. And those children would carry that story forward, would tell it to their own children, would use it as a reminder that the world they inherited, flawed as it was, had been shaped by people who refused to accept that hatred was inevitable, who proved, through action rather than just words, that different peoples could live together in peace. That justice was worth fighting for, that mercy was never wasted, that love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force in existence. The night deepened, the music continued, and at the crossroads where two worlds met, a new story was being written. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not a conclusion, but an invitation. The invitation to believe that no matter how broken the world seems, no matter how deep the divisions, there are always people willing to build bridges. Always moments when courage can change everything. Always hope, if you know where to look for it. Eli Thornwood had looked for it in the last place he expected. In the eyes of a stranger. In the trust of former enemies. In the simple act of choosing mercy over fear. And he had found not just hope, but a reason to live. A purpose that gave meaning to survival. A legacy that would echo through generations, whispering the same truth to anyone willing to listen. That in the end, we are all connected. All part of the same story. And the choices we make in our darkest moments define not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone who comes after. Eli turned from the gathering and found Nalnish standing beneath the cottonwood tree where Mary and Rose rested. She had placed fresh wildflowers on both graves, a gesture that spoke of respect and understanding. When she saw him approaching, she did not move away from the graves. Instead, she waited, giving him space to join her or remain apart, as he chose. He chose to join her. They stood together in the darkness, the music and laughter of the community a warm backdrop behind them. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. The mountains stood witness, as they had for millennia, to yet another story of loss and hope, of endings and beginnings. Eli reached out. Nalnish took his hand. No words were needed. In that simple touch existed everything they had become to each other, not replacements for what was lost, not salvation from pain, but companions walking the same difficult path, choosing each day to build rather than destroy, to connect rather than isolate, to hope rather than despair. The night deepened. The music continued. And at the crossroads where two worlds had met in blood and fear, a new story was being written in gestures of kindness, in choices made toward light rather than darkness. The wind moved through the cottonwood branches one last time, carrying with it the whisper of voices long silent. Mary and Rose, Mongus, all those who had gone before. And if Eli closed his eyes and listened carefully, he could almost hear them saying what he needed most to hear. Well done. Live well. Love fiercely. And never forget that mercy is the beginning of all things worth building. He opened his eyes, squeezed Nalnish's hand gently, and together they walked back toward the light.